Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and today I want to talk about science fiction. I'm a very big Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke fan. I tend to prefer science fiction that's a little bit speculative and maybe on what people might call the hard end of the spectrum. But I don't really think that that there's one style that's better than any other. But I just find that stuff like that, stuff like Heinlein, tend to be more my cup of tea than things that are really heavy on the action adventure. I like stuff that maybe spends a little bit of time discussing the premise of the setting and the world, and it doesn't have to get in deep into the science, but I like kind of knowing that is there. So anyways, I thought I'd talk about a couple of books that are of interest, and that one of them had a really big impact on me. Another one is one I just really like that I read recently because I don't believe it was in print for a while. So the first book is The City and the Stars, and that's by Arthur C. Clarke. And this is the book that really kick-started my interest in science fiction. My dad had a copy of it in like a box in the basement, and I, sort of, got it with a bunch of, he had a bunch of books down there, and this was just one of the books I happened to grab. This isn't the original. This is a recent one that I found, but I read it and I just couldn't stop. And it's I didn't realize this until years later, but there was another story he wrote before City and the Stars, I believe, called Against the Fall of Night, and it's kind of the same thing, but this is like a sort of expanded, revised version of that story, but both have kind of coexisted. And there are people that prefer Against the Fall of Night. There are people that prefer The City and the Stars. I actually have not read Against the Fall of Night. At one point, I want to, but I don't know. This was my first Arthur C. Clarke book, so I've just always found that this is enough for me. But it's a little tough to get a copy of this. It took me a while to track this one down. I mean, you can still get copies of it in print, but I did find that it was a little bit difficult to find. So I've seen Kindle versions that are fairly easy, but getting a print version was kind of tricky. But it's worth it. This is a really great book. The basic premise is it's set like billions of years in the future, and it's like an enclosed city. Like all of humanity has died off except for this small group that lives inside this sort of little super city that's run by a central computer, and the entire population is stored in the databases of the computer, and they have like a set number of people that can live at any given time. And people live for centuries, and then they go back into storage, and then the computer eventually brings them back again and creates a new body for them. And it's about a character named Alvin who's what they call a unique, and he's somebody who hasn't been born previously, so he's like a new person. And he goes on a very interesting sort of quest to find out about himself and the city. And like one of the ideas here is that the people of the city, I believe the name of the city was Diaspar, are sort of naturally afraid of the outside world. They don't want to venture beyond the city, and it looks like it's all waste beyond the city, anyways. So and Alvin doesn't seem to have that, so he's able to go and venture beyond and find other things that are out there. I won't spoil what he finds. It's a very I just found. When I first read this, I just couldn't get enough of like every step of the adventure where he's learning more and more about the world. That was, to me, what really got me interested in this book was there was sort of a world building aspect to it, but also kind of like a slow unveiling and a mystery component. But what's nice about this is you read this, you get like all of the bits of Arthur C. Clarke that you sort of come to expect. You even have like the theme of the non-physical, highly evolved, intelligent being. It takes a very different form in this book, but it's something that he addresses in a number of his works, like Childhood's End and 2001. This idea of intelligence that isn't bound to a physical body, that's sort of able to roam the universe. He gets into that in I think, a pretty interesting way. in this one. So this was a very good book. This is again, I can't speak highly enough. I can't speak highly enough of Arthur C. Clarke. I think he's a great writer. He's a great science fiction writer. And what I like about him is he knows his stuff. He definitely has a background in science, but and he uses it in a lot of the stuff that he writes. But he doesn't overwhelm you with scientific language. I find. I mean, it's there. He'll get into it for sure, but he's also a really good writer, and so it's balanced with great prose. And so for me, Clarke is just a very you don't like for Clarke you can still understand it even if you're not like a real science person. So I just think that's a really I think that's a really great aspect of his writing, because the science is there, but it's not something that's it's not quite as required as it might be for some people on the really hard end of the science fiction spectrum. And maybe that's just I always sort of interpreted that as confidence on his part, like he didn't really need to show off, because he it was very clear that he understood the material. So anyways, yeah, this is a great book, and if this is one you can't track down, you might be able to find Against the Fallen Night. Let me make sure that's the actual title. Yeah, Against the Fallen Night. If and again, if you can't, any of his later books, I mean, Childhood's End is great, 2001 is great. Songs of Distant Earth. He's got a whole bunch of books that are worth reading. Rendezvous with Rama. But this one, I don't know. This one this one's a little bit more. I don't know. There's kind of like a mythic vibe going on here, or something. There's something in this book that's a little bit different than his other works. So I highly recommend it. And like I said, this really got me interested in science fiction. I hadn't read a science fiction book until I encountered this, and then I was just hooked. And I think I bought like every Arthur C. Clarke book I could get my hands on, and then just was a fan since then. So the other book is by Isaac Asimov, and again, he's another great writer, and he's kind of interesting because his style can really vary a lot depending on the book. And this one is The End of Eternity. Now, I had not read this until recently, and again, this is this one I guess came out in 2010 or something. So I don't believe this was in print. At least I don't really remember it being in print, or seeing it that much around. But boy, this is a great book. This is about time travel. It's probably the best book about time travel I've ever read. Part of that might be because of my taste. I tend to like books, like I said, slower pace. I don't mind hanging out in a hangar bay for 200 pages if there's like a really interesting setup there. So one of my favorite books is Starship Troopers, and my favorite part is just the whole when they're in boot camp and when they're in the classroom, and just kind of the stuff that isn't really all that exciting, but is kind of, I don't know, for me is very engaging and interesting. And this is about, I guess you'd call it like a time travel institute that exists sort of beside the actual, beside actual linear time. So they're sort of outside of time, and I don't want to give away anything, but the basic rundown is their purpose is to manipulate events in human history, by just doing little subtle things that change the course of human history to maximize the benefit for as many people as possible. So they basically want to create the best of all possible worlds. And there's a lot of downsides to doing that. So for example, they some of the changes that they implement lead to there being no such thing as space travel. But ultimately, overall the impact is beneficial. So that's the way they go. So they're a very sort of cautious, risk-averse organization controlling the flow of time, and it's just it's kind of like I almost want to say it's a little bit like Hogwarts at a time travel institute. It's just a really fun and interesting environment that the story takes place in. It gets all into sort of history and time, and it does a really great job with that. And the ending is really spectacular. I think the ending, was really great. I was very like when you get to the end, it's just page turning. So this was for me this was an outstanding book. And if you like time travel stuff, which I do, if you like history stuff, which I do, and if you like science fiction, this is a really great book, and it's really, really well written. This is for science fiction. This is surprisingly well written. I mean, a lot of times science fiction, doesn't have that reputation, but this is almost goes outside of the genre because it's so well done. And so so these two books, and again, Asimov is somebody that I really like, so I would recommend any of his books really. But this one, I don't know. This was a surprise to me. I somehow it escaped my radar. I think it's because it wasn't really widely available. Maybe I just never noticed it. And it was like, wow, how have I not heard of this book? It was one of these books like I felt like I should have heard of ages ago. And it was really just a pleasure to read through. So I highly recommend it, and I hope my overviews were sufficient to get people interested. Again, I'm a bit of a science fiction fan, so and I don't really get a chance to talk about much on the blog and stuff. And usually, like I do a lot of stuff on here that's wuxia and fantasy and stuff like that, and I have this sort of pattern that I've followed into where if I'm working on like a wuxia game, I'm going to be very much engaged in wuxia reading and things like that, and reading about China. But I always have this habit of at the end of a month getting like a science fiction book and just turning off everything and just reading a science fiction book. So kind of like at night I might just watch a kung fu movie, same thing. City in the Stars and The End of Eternity, I think they're two really great science fiction books. They're both, I don't know, kind of different. They're not exactly what you think of when you think of Asimov or Clarke, but for me, The City of the Stars and Arthur C. Clarke are like, I can't separate the two things. And this is just, I mean, I was already such a fan of Asimov, and then I found this book, and it was like, for me, this was like 10 times better than any of his other books that I had read. So it was just a really pleasant surprise. Now, again, maybe that's just, all of my tastes just happen to perfectly align with this book, so maybe that's part of it. But yeah, so I really recommend these, and I will maybe do some more science fiction discussions in the near future. I don't know. I haven't really gotten too into science fiction on the blog and stuff, so I don't know. We don't have a science fiction game or anything like that, so I just don't usually get many opportunities to discuss it. But I like talking about it. So if people enjoy this video, I'll happily talk about other books or maybe topics in science fiction if people are interested in that. If people want to get into any kind of topic, just let me know in the comments, and I will. I'll consider it next time I do a video. So, all right, I will talk to you later. Bye.